One of the things I see as a big contributor to burnout is misalignment of expectations, challenges with managers who are ill-equipped to have meaningful conversations with their team members about workload, about their personal lives, or even mature enough to sort of help teams and individuals navigate ambiguity in hypergrowth or uncertain environments.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Finding Equilibrium show. I'm Lawrence Mitchell and I'm delighted to be here and delighted that you're here and delighted that my guest today is Noterman, who's the Global Head of People and Culture at LinkTree, which is a really cool application. I don't know if you've tried it, but I've set up my own LinkTree, as I was saying just before the other day. So it's really cool. But welcome, Isa. I know that you've been super busy and I'm really, really grateful that you've made a little bit of time in your hectic schedule to spend some time with us. So how are you and where are you today?
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much for thinking of me and inviting me onto this very, very important area of well-being and mental health. And I'm so excited to have this conversation with you because it is a passion for me. It's also something that I deeply care about, not only as a HR practititioner, but as a working mum, as someone who has also experienced moments of burnout and mental ill health over the course of time. So I love every opportunity that I can get to talk about these topics. So I appreciate you inviting me.
Wonderful. Well, maybe a starting point would be, you've got a big job, global head of people and culture. So that brings with it a lot of responsibility because it's not only your own health and well-being, but also everybody else's. Like everybody's problem is your problem. How did you come to get that role? Like, what was your journey? You mentioned your own mental health challenges. So I'm interested to understand your path to this point.
Yeah, for sure. So I think my path started, I would say, as I was sort of understanding my strengths and areas of interest at university. And I did a behavioural science and philosophy degree at Monash University in Melbourne many years ago. And within that realm, I really started to find a strong interest around how people interact, what motivates people, what drives people. What is unique about us as we show up in the world, and given that the world of work is where we spend a lot of our time interacting with other people, but also where we find a sense of self and identity and purpose. It was such an interesting place to apply all that knowledge and do that in a practical commercial sense. So heading into, like probably most people who start their path in people and culture, I landed in talent acquisition, recruitment, and really just followed my nose and just said yes to a million opportunities that came my way. Was a jill of many trades, wore many hats over the years. And it wasn't until I fell into sort of the tech space, the tech startup space, when I was at realestate.com.au way back in the beginning of time, that I found that this was the perfect incubator for really challenging the status quo in both HR and workplaces, but also there was really innovative spaces to use new technologies to drive a better world of work. And since then, I've just really loved to apply all that knowledge in the tech hypergrowth spaces. So spending time at Google and Spotify and Pandora Music and now at LinkTree, it really feels like a strong alignment for me. And the way that we get to experiment and try new things to really further the world of work. And it's no longer just a place that you show up to 9 to 5. It is so much more. That really excites me. So here at LinkTree as the global head of people and culture, I'm really responsible for the entire people strategy, working with us executive suite. I'm really deciding and defining what our culture roadmap looks like. What are the things we need to lean into in this new world of work, especially coming out of the pandemic, if we're even out of it, and also just what are the consequences of what we've just gone through. In terms of talent mobility, what people care about, their own needs and desires and wants. So yeah, I'm loving the work. It's super interesting, and and it has a real impact on people's lives.
You realize like those companies that you've worked for, the tech kind of startup, Google, Spotify, LinkTree, there's something about that culture that clearly appeals to you because they're very fast moving, they're changing. In many ways, that's probably prepared you for what's happened over the last couple of years, because before that we kind of choose industries. If you like fast moving, you go into a tech startup. If you like slow moving, you don't. Whereas now, of course, everything's been disrupted. This is what's really interesting about this last couple of years, is that everything's been disrupted. How did it impact you though, as at LinkTree? I'm assuming you had to kind of move everyone out of the office and do all of that. But I'm very curious to understand how you managed to maintain a culture of people during a period of huge disruption, uncertainty, distress, and everything. How did you manage to hold it all together?
Yeah, so I think I'll give you two examples, two scenarios where the first part of the pandemic, I was at Spotify in New York, and I was leading the diversity, inclusion, and equity efforts over there globally. And that was the beginning of what we really had to wrap our arms and heads around really quickly. It was like, how do we mobilize our people to working from home distributedly in all different corners of the world under all different circumstances, because each country had their own response to what was happening. And I think the one thing that really solidified that experience and enabled people to feel taken care of is that we put mental health front and center of all the initiatives that we did. So we built a playbook over about a course of 4 to 6 weeks, and every week we had a new sort of iteration of what you can do at home, what you can do to keep managing this load, both the workload, the mental load, and the emotional load that came with the pandemic. And we just help people navigate it and provide them tips and I guess tricks in a way to help them feel supported. And we create a lot more flexibility. We sort of redefined certain roles because, as you know, the physical space roles where you needed to be in a physical space to do your job, they needed to be repurposed in certain ways. So it was really, doing things quickly with a lot of good intent, with ensuring that we're putting the person and the human front and center of all these decisions that we made. And then it just kind of flowed on from there. And I think it worked for the most part. Obviously, there's still a lot of disruption and inequity that exists and can impact people in different ways. But I think towards the end of last year, we saw how important mental health was, and we started to really double down on the efforts and initiatives around that. But moving into this year, and I changed jobs and relocated back to Australia, I took on the role at LinkTree. And the difference here is that we were already a remote first workforce. We didn't have to move people from one place to another. There was already a distributed team working all over the world in different locations, in different cities, from Australia to Brazil to Indonesia to France or Dublin. And I think that was we were already 2 steps ahead. We didn't have to kind of reshape people's expectations. The expectation was we're going to continue to do what we do best in the way that we know. But what we're going to do is ensure that when people are experiencing an acute or hard lockdown, we'll turn up the support mechanisms in those locations as needed. And there was a number of different initiatives that we sort of kickstarted and really listened to our people and looked at what their unique experiences were, working parent in a share house with 3 other people, in a remote place where Wi-Fi was sort of spotty. We looked at all the different archetypes that were showing up at work, and we tried to meet people where they were at to enable them to feel both connected and productive in their work. And that seemed to alleviate a lot of the mental load that people experience when they're wondering, am I being monitored, or am I doing enough, or what's expected of me, or all of those questions that kind of you ruminate on when you feel apart from your group.
It's true. I love that. So I'd love to maybe dig a little bit deeper into that. So when you've actually looked at the different contexts of the employees, how did you customize? Because almost like someone who is working in a shared, like we say, working from home, but it's a very different experience based on where your home is. And some people, they want to get out of their home. But how did you, could you support somebody who was in, for example, a shared home and had a limited space, no desk, and some of those things? I'm curious to understand how you responded to that problem.
Yeah, so it was a couple of approaches. So for this particular context, we offered people a working from home stipend, which allowed them to set up their personal space in a way that could optimize for their work. Meaning you could purchase a standing desk, you could get a monitor riser, you could get a really comfortable chair that you know will help you work, even if you might be working at the kitchen table. No noise cancelling headphones. You had a stipend to apply to anything that's going to help you set up at home. That was the first part.
Cool.
The second part is where you can co-contributed to internet and Wi-Fi. So these are expenditures, but they were the things that really helped people feel like, oh, I don't have to worry about that. And they're really just such a small price to pay to ensure that people feel like they can do their best work under the conditions. We also had meeting-free hours during the day, so you could sort of move this 2-hour block around during the day to see, like, don't book in this spot because it's either not working for my housemates who are on a call in the other room, or my kids might need something, or something is happening at home. And it just gives you a little bit more flexibility and not, you're back to back to back. And then the other piece was we offered Uber meal vouchers and Uber Eats to everyone. So they didn't have to fight over the kitchen, which can be sometimes a bit fraught. And also you didn't have to put yourself out there to go to the grocery store or get what you need and put just feeling like you're putting yourself at risk. Dropped off the Uber, and it just felt a lot of people appreciate that piece the most. Meals, food, it's like fundamental. So, and it actually what we would do is just have a Zoom call with everyone eating together with just a fun topic to talk through, and that seemed to build that element of eating together without actually sitting in the same room around the same table.
Yeah, that's really good. I loved what you said about supporting people so that they could do their best work, because you realize that all of those things are distractions. If we're worried about food and you kind of take all of those things around. And that reminds me right at the beginning when I 7-8 years ago, when I was creating a wellbeing program in a big corporate in London, I looked to Google for inspiration. I know you spent some time at Google as well in the past, and I'd love you, because Google, I remember looking at their offices, and I was thinking, my God, how do we go from here? Because it felt like they really had thought it through, and the office environments were so unique. I'd love you to share some of the learnings, I guess, that you got from that period at Google that could be relevant to now.
Yeah, so I mean, Google was like a dream when I first went there. It was basically, I was working at a place where I would live. It was just access to everything.
Where were you? Which country were you in? Australia or in
Australia
America?
and New York, and I spent a lot of time in Mountain View, California, where the Googleplex is. And I just remember just going, this feels like workplace Disneyland. And because there was a dry cleaner on site, there was laundries on site, there was daycare on site, there was all these things that were just an extension of your home, but right there with you. I have my own thoughts about that now, because it definitely motivated you to stay at work longer. So I don't know what the trade-offs are there. I'll let you be the judge of that, the audience. But I think what I did appreciate is that things like very intentional workplace design that allowed for people to come together in moments of collaboration and congregation and community, but also allowed people to go off and work in their focus tasks really nicely. And that was something that was really intentional from the outset. The workplace designers, the facilities folks were really focused on making sure that the workplace was productive. And I think in the early days, that was quite phenomenal, quite a groundbreaking idea, because typically you'd see people working in booths, or you'd see them working in an office with a closed door. And of course they have, all the different trade-offs for those different concepts. But what Google really did was enable the collaboration and community to really be a part of how you worked. And that was like the driving force. And then this sense of community that came with that, like we're Googlers in it together.
Yeah, I love that. Were they the first to do that, like the office environment? Because they, like you described, the kind of Disneyland, and that's what it felt. I went to the one in London, so I haven't been to the one in.
Yeah, I went to the one in London as well, which was beautiful. Yeah. Yeah.
But they had a slide. I mean, it was incredible.
Yeah.
You know, it was really an experience in itself, and lots of everything's changed. And I wasn't sure whether everyone copied Google, if you like. They started with that office redesign around the task, as opposed to everything happens at your desk, or whether it was something that came from, you know, other tech companies. I don't know if you know.
I think Google was probably one of the earlier adopters of that approach, and probably were really good at publicizing that. I think the employer brand around Google was very prominent quite early, opposed to some of the other tech companies who are in Silicon Valley or in that area. So I do think they were they were pioneers in a lot of these spaces, but I don't necessarily think that they were the first. I think there were some other folks doing it. Yeah.
It's interesting. So it must have been very hard to have left Google, like after that that experience. And where did you go after Google? Where was?
Yeah, so I spent some time at Pandora Music when they were starting out in Australia and New Zealand. So we were, you know, a pretty small team, but the first international arm of Pandora Music, which has now been acquired by SiriusXM, and, you know, is now part of a much bigger digital radio conglomerate. But yeah, I spent 2 years with them. Super exciting. Loved that. I think what I loved most about it was a very founder-led, you know, approach, which was, you know, you could feel the heart and soul in everything that we did, and it was very much tied to that person's own vision and mission. And yeah, it was fun to be able to build out that satellite business, but still have ties to this US core, which I hadn't actually explored before. So it was good.
That was good. And then Spotify.
So and then Spotify in New York. Yeah. Yeah.
That must have been cool. Like, you've had such a cool career and worked in some very you know, interesting companies that have had huge impact. So how did your experience at Spotify compare to, you know, other companies? It's interesting. You know, I'm interested to understand the culture there and what it was like working for a business like that.
Yeah, I think it was the first time I'd worked for a European company. So Spotify's Swedish, and Swedish at its core. And I love that. And I was really attracted to that because I'd been working for large US companies for a while, and this one sort of really felt distinctly different. And I think it was that sort of European, Swedish mentality that I was attracted to. And the Swedish mindset is really around balance, and it's really around doing the right thing, and equity and equality and fairness. And that really was obviously exciting for me because I was taking on the global head of diversity and inclusion at the time. So I found that a really compelling role because it was a very Swedish company, but also very global and rapidly growing. And I don't think many people knew at the time that we were actually Swedish or were a Swedish company. So I think that the really interesting part was, how do we carry this culture of these Swedish values throughout the organization and build that culture globally and with those deep roots in the sort of the Swedish approach. And I think what I really loved about that is the leaders were very egoless. They were very human-led. My manager there, the CHRO, Katarina Berg, was quite phenomenal, always wanting to try and challenge traditional concepts of work and work life. And she was a huge advocate for a lot of work, a lot of different communities across the business, but also very fair and balanced. Like, we still are a business. We still have to produce results. We still have to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to. And that was, I think that was very empowering for me in that role. And I think leaders are a huge part of how we show up at work and what we can realize about ourselves and unlock our potential. I definitely felt like I was unlocked in that role.
Wow, that's really interesting. And that whole point you say about balance, I'm curious as to what initiatives Spotify did or you did when you were there to achieve that balance, because that's a lot of businesses do struggle between the needs of the business and the needs of the employees. And your point around Spotify really prioritizing balance or unfairness and all of the things that we talk about a lot through Wellbeing at Work in terms of diversity, inclusion and belonging. If there are any initiatives that you can share, I'd be really interested to hear them.
Yeah, so we on the sort of the balance front, I think early on in their journey, we were trying to understand, like, why were people experiencing burnout? What was going on there? Everyone's working really hard and we're in this hyper growth startup. We just IPO'd, or we were going through that IPO. And I think everyone was like, it's grueling. And what we did is we started to examine, like, what were some of the things going on? And I think people just wanted to be able to talk about their mental health. They wanted to be able to have a forum to go like, hey, I'm struggling, or hey, I need a break. And we sort of saw symptoms of that with maybe some people were dependent on alcohol or substances, or maybe we saw some behavioral challenges popping up in certain areas. Maybe there were some people whose performance was declining, and they were typically high performers. So we started to look at all those different signals and try to unpack what that was. And I think it all distilled down to, there was a strong sense of people wanting to achieve, but just feeling super burnt out or not being able to manage their mental health and wellness in the right way. So we built this whole sort of well-being core, this mental health core of the D&I practice. And we felt like if people are well, we can be the best version of ourselves, but we can also be the best version for other people as well. And by, making sure we have a healthy identity with ourselves, a healthy relationship with ourselves, we can do so much more. And that was sort of like the very core of the work. And then we built out on that. So if your mental health is well and your well-being as well, then you can start to go, okay, well, I have a good relationship with my identity, I have a good relationship with my community, I have a good relationship with my organization and the company. And that's really sort of the lens in which we push the work. So one of my team members, Lynn, who is incredible and is driving this role globally, with a team of like 45 ambassadors, global wellness ambassadors. We did things like first aid training, mental health first aid training. We did a huge campaign around World Mental Health Day. We utilized apps like Headspace. We employed mental health days. We really started to normalize the conversation around mental health and wellness in the workplace as a starting point, so we could allow people to have real conversations with their managers and their peers about the things they're going through. Personally, I came back from my first parental leave and I was experiencing postpartum depression. One of the first people to notice that was actually my boss, who said, hey, I don't think things are going so well. Like, I think we need to modify. I think we need to create some flexibility in your arrangement so you can take care of yourself. And that was like the first time anyone had ever come to me. And having those open conversations just allowed a lot more for people to shine through and also take care of themselves in the right ways.
I love that. That's such a thank you for sharing that with me. I'm curious to know whether, because it sounds like you did a lot of activity, a lot of different initiatives, and really helped educate the people that there were these resources around. What did you track or have any kind of metric where you could understand the impact that had on the business?
I think we looked at it in a couple of ways. We looked at engagement survey results, and we actually asked the question flat out, like, do you feel like your well-being is, in a good place, or do you feel like the needs of your life are on balance with the needs of work? We would ask these questions to uncover and understand people's lived experience at work, and we'd splice that by gender and race, ethnicity, and other factors that we will, if there was disparities between different groups, and how we could sort of understand that some more. I think from a brand perspective, I think it was very compelling because we started to sort of embed this into the products, into the campaigns that we would run, into, all of a sudden we had all of these, podcasts pop up around wellness and mental health. And I think that started to kind of generate a broader discussion. And I think that's where the business really thrives, is when you can embed what your people are living and experiencing into what is being put out there into the public domain. And that authenticity translates into a very powerful brand and a very powerful and sincere story that you want to take others on the journey for or with. So I mean, it's hard to quantify that in terms of raw numbers, but those were the types of things that I would say would signal that it was a really powerful strategic move.
No, I can see that. Thank you. I love that. I love what you said about normalizing the discussion. Because when it becomes normal, it really starts to have such a big impact on the whole thing. Moving on now to LinkTree and where you are now. So just really building on the story, I'm curious to really understand the initiatives that you have in place now. You mentioned burnout, and that's what we see, through our work, that the big risk is burnout, with all the change and everyone's really, really exhausted. And, we need to support our people as much as we can to prevent burnout. What are you doing at LinkTree to really support your people to be their best selves and to do the best work?
So I think that there's like some topical things that we do, but I do believe that the real change and the real impact comes from the systemic change that we're trying to create. So on the topical front, we have Headspace as an application to help people disconnect or have a moment of calm and meditation. We have moments throughout the day, or the days are punctuated with a Pilates class or a yoga class or a 10-minute meditation at your desk. I think that we have our mental health days. You can take up to 5 per year, and if you need more, let's talk about it.
And those mental health days are like just a break, and so
just a day where you can say, hey, I want to elect to take this time off to focus on my mental well-being or mental health, and this is, you don't have to explain any more than that. It's it. We also had some company-wide days off, which were not designed for mental health days, but just like, let's all disconnect, because we know also that when we're offline, work continues in the background and we come back to more work than we originally had left. And so it's a big deterrent for people to take time off when they know they've just got an increasing mountain of work once they return. So that company-wide day off was a reset for many folks, including myself. I think on the systemic front, one of the things I see as a big contributor to burnout is misalignment of expectations, challenges with managers who are ill-equipped to have meaningful conversations with their team members about workload, about their personal lives, or even mature enough to sort of help teams and individuals navigate ambiguity in hypergrowth or uncertain environments. So, and then the last piece, which I've recently read a lot more about, was around poorly designed jobs. And that's really something that the Future of Work Institute is focusing on doing research around, is like, if you craft a job poorly, either you undervalue the skill set or you overvalue the responsibilities, that you index too many requirements and responsibilities, and you design that poorly, it causes a lot of anxiety in the individual who's in that role, because there's missed expectations. It's I'm doing too much. Like, if we don't craft them properly, then we have some serious burnout issues. And I've seen that over the course of my time, especially when you're in these hypergrowth startups. You tend to do more than just one job. You tend to wear many hats. You tend to do a lot of work. And so that can fuel it. And that's because the organization is changing and growing so rapidly that you naturally just pick up other things as you roll along. So I just think on that note, we have to be really intentional about the jobs that we're creating, and allow at least for a 20% buffer of like ebb and flow work that comes. And I think that's the systemic stuff that we need to tackle in the workplace as leaders, as practitioners.
Sure. And do you find that people are very open to that? Because what you said about job design as well is interesting in terms of because often in a fast-moving, fast-changing environment, the jobs you don't really know, particularly with the new role, you don't know exactly what they're going to do, and then people bring their own experience, and the job changes. So are people open to looking at those elements and see those linked to well-being and mental well-being? Because it feels that you've got a very
almost
like a global perspective on well-being. It's like everything impacts your mental well-being. So if you've got a poorly designed job, then that will. So I'm curious to know that,
the leap still needs to be made. I think people still don't quite understand the cause and effect, or even like a correlation between these two things. I think we need to take leaders on that journey and understand, like, if you're designing an organization, you're designing the roles, like having really clear deliverables or clear line of sight into what we're laddering up to, what we're trying to achieve here, and then like the core requirements of that and the parameters in which you work, because then that allows for sort of the balance to exist. Like, I don't think anyone's striving to work 90 hours a week or 60 hours a week. I think we're striving to work with purpose, with meaning, with impact. And so what often happens is that the busy work just constantly floods in, and then we don't get to do the stuff that really excites us and ignites us. And that's where I feel like the tension arises, and that's where you could start to feel that push and pull between the load and expectations and where you really need to apply your best skill sets. So it's just closing those gaps.
It's closing the gaps. So
and bringing people on the journey.
It's always a journey, isn't it? And it's interesting. Your point around the managers as a cause of burnout, I mean, it's something I've experienced myself a lot, and I think we all have. How are you addressing that one? Because there's the volume of work, but often the things like a poorly skilled manager eats up energy, and we don't actually see it, so it's saying, okay, it's applying that kind of functional heads, and someone should be able to do this job in the allocated time, but then you have all these distractions, and if you haven't got the support, how are you addressing, because we see this a lot in terms of that middle manager layer being such a key and pivotal role in terms of creating healthy cultures, healthy environments. And I'm curious how you are addressing that problem.
On the incoming front, so when you're hiring managers in, I think you have to hire them to your level of values, like very, very intentionally. You have to be like, these are our values. We're going to test you on those values. We're going to hold you to those values. They're important. They're integral. If you're a values-led organization, which we are, and you have to be incredibly rigorous around the emotional intelligence, the self-awareness, and the empathy that leaders must have to be able to lead people. This isn't just about a senior level of doing the same thing. This is about a much broader scope of work that not everyone's equipped to, even if they're the best at what they do, as if they are a domain expert. The next level is not always managing people. It's a very different skill set. So being intentional about people leadership as a skill set. On the internal front is really examining like what your leadership principles are, and then holding all your leaders to account. And for us, it's empowerment. It's not, micromanaging and controlling everything. It's really around player coach. I'm here to coach you along that journey, and I'm here to get down in the dirt and get it done with you when we need to, when we're short, or when we've got more work to do. We've got a sprint to take to the end of the year. So I think it's really modeling that as well from the top, and ensuring that you have leaders who are demonstrating, acknowledging and honoring, rewarding, recognizing the behaviors they want to see within their organization. But that has to come from the very, very top, because that just cascades all the way down. And just being brave enough to say to those who are not good managers, move on. And that's a really hard part. It's like, this is not the place for you. We are here to cultivate your leadership style, but you have to be willing to change too. And when you've exercised or you've exhausted all of those options, then you've just got to say, sometimes it's time to go and move people out of the business. Obviously controversial, given that we're in a talent short market, but it is more detrimental to your business to have a bad leader than it is to have an open seat.
I agree. I completely agree. It's so interesting talking to you. Last question is around, because it's all about balance. We talk about well-being and mental well-being. Your role and the roles that you've had have obviously been very challenging. And we touched on the fact that you've moved countries during the pandemic. So, you've gone through a lot of personal change yourself. I'm curious to understand how you maintain your own balance, your own well-being, and given all the different parts of your life and the responsibility that you have in your professional life, and and balancing the many balls that we have. What do you do? What can you share with us that keeps you in equilibrium?
Great question, because I don't think I've figured it out. I don't think I've really mastered it myself. I'm a very empathetic leader. I'm a very servant leader. So I really take on and harbor the experiences and emotions of those around me, my kids, my partner, my team, my leaders. So I know that that's very, it's something that I'm very aware of. Like I'm very conscious that is part of my role. It's part of how, who I am. For me, it's turning everything off. It's retreating. It's going into a book, full analog mode, where I don't actually have any digital things around me, and that has helped me really disconnect from the constant stimulation that we get from phones and our computers and work and things like that. So I really do go into a dark spot, and I just disconnect for a day or two. And I need to do that sort of every quarter, every 6 months. So I definitely find that sleep is really important to me. As it comes for digital devices, I do use an Aura ring, which I was just holding up. But that has really helped me manage my energy, my stress, and really tune into my sleep patterns, which have been really affected by living in a big city during a pandemic, and then moving countries and having 2 small children and working on a global role. Like, I really have to focus on, there is an end to the day where I will disconnect. So sleep is very important for me. Eating well at the core. I find when I do eat lighter meals and I eat healthier meals, my brain just functions better. I have less fog. And I think spending time with family, like really connecting to those around me, I get a lot of meaning and purpose out of those roles. And that helps me just continue to find who I am and get back in touch with who I am, which is very helpful for me. And seeing a therapist.
It sounds like you're really good with boundaries, and
I'm trying.
I think we're all trying. I think no one's really figured this stuff out, and we're all work in progress. But it's finding the tools that work for you, and doing more of the things that help you feel good. But Isa, thank you so much. Let me acknowledge you for all the amazing work that you've done. Most recently, I'm glad you're back in Australia, and LinkTree are very fortunate to have you back in Australia. Were you born in Sydney? Is that your
Melbourne originally?
Melbourne,
Melbourne born and bred, and then just moved to Sydney for Google back in 2006. So I've been here sort of ever since.
Cool. And where can people find out more about you or about LinkTree?
So I actually have a LinkTree of myself. So you can get me at LinkTree. Isa Pisa is my handle. But you can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find there. And I think that's pretty much the best spot to find me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for spending
time
Lawrence.
With us. It's been awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. And thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.